So now we're going to get into the crop planning part of things. So why bother with crop planning? Well, it helps you know how much you can expect to harvest, hopefully, given you're not in control of the weather and the bugs and the diseases that come in. And it tells you how much you can expect and when you can expect to have it. So you have an idea, you know, if I plant this thing in April, then I should have it by late June, and then that spot's going to be open for another crop to go into that space. So you can really kind of plan your garden to maximize your harvest. By writing down your crop plan and drawing your garden map, you're going to be able to implement a crop rotation plan, which is going to help prevent disease in future years. So if you plant the same crops in the same spot year after year, you're going to build up a lot of disease in the soil. And so even if it did well the first year, 2, 3, those diseases are going to build up to the point where they're just going to immediately start attacking your plants once they go in the ground. So one way to prevent that is to rotate your crops, at least on a 3-year rotation, so you don't put something in the same family in the same spot for at least 3 or 4 years after you grow it. So this takes a little bit of learning, but things like in the tomato family are peppers, potatoes, eggplant, tomatillos are in that same family, and they share the same diseases a lot of times. So brassicas, so cabbage, kale, cauliflower, broccoli, stuff like that are in the same family, and they share a lot of diseases. So those are probably your, and also squash and cucumbers, that kind of stuff are in the same family, and they share a lot of diseases. So those are probably the main ones that you want to rotate. And crop rotation plans can get complicated if you look it up. I mean, there's people with like 10-year crop rotation plans. Really, 3 years is probably the minimum that you want to work with. So by creating a map, you know what you planted, you know, in that spot this year, and so next year you can plan to not plant it there. And then finally, the most important reason why you need to create a crop map and figure out exactly how much you're going to plant is because, you know, we're dealing with 50 to 60 seed orders, and we have a limited supply, and we want to just give you what you know you're going to be able to plant this year. I'm happy to give you lots of seeds and plants, but I want to know that it's going to go into the ground and grow food for your family, and not just going to go to waste because you I don't know, you just wanted a lot of it, but you didn't actually have the room for it. So that's really the main reason why we go through this exercise, but it does have lots of benefits for you, and it's a really great skill that's going to carry you quite far as you get into gardening. It can be kind of overwhelming your first year, and I apologize for that, but we're happy to help you plan things out. But once you create that first plan, you know, in future years, often you can just rotate those rows to different parts of your garden. You don't even need to have to rearrange anything. You can just move it to a different spot, the whole row. So it gets easier is what I'm trying to say. All right. So why aren't you moving? Okay, there we go. So there's some basic questions that you want to answer about crop planning, and that is, what do you want to grow? That's your first one. What do you want to eat, basically? How much of each one do you want? And then you have to answer, when are you going to plant it? When can you expect to harvest it? Do you need to plan to resow certain things periodically if you want a steady supply? And then how much space does your crop need? And then where are you going to plant everything? And that final question is where you're going to get into the actual drawing of a garden map. So what do you want to plant? You know, what do you like to eat? What do you buy? What do you spend a lot of money on? What do you wish you could eat more of, but you can't afford to purchase? Is there something you want to try canning or freezing for the winter? You know, if you had a garden last year, what did well, what didn't do well? Are there any new vegetables that you want to try? So basically you start off by just putting a list together of what you want to grow. Sorry, my toddler is in the other room screaming his head off. So, ooh, daddy. So figuring out how much you are going to plant. this can be a gut feeling, or this can be on the plant cheat sheet that we've handed out in your binder or in that online folder, has a range of how many plants per person. It's one of the columns on the cheat sheet, so you can check that. If you just want a little bit of something, you can go with the lower range of that number. If this is the product that you want to can or freeze for the winter, then go with a higher number or even double or triple that amount so that you have enough to really make canning worthwhile for you, because it's a lot of setup. We'll talk about canning at a future workshop.
And to answer Chris's question, we are working on getting some classes together.
Yes.
That might be offered via Zoom, but we're working on it.
Yes. Yes. And then so once you come up with a number for how many plants you want per person in your garden, then I would add 10 to 20% more onto that number than you think you'll need to account for the fact that there's lots of things that will kill your plants. So having a little extra to begin with will help you have the amount of harvest that you want when it comes down to it, hopefully. All right, so when are you going to plant? There are 3 general planting times. That's early spring, so that's March to April, your early spring cool weather loving crops. There's late spring, early summer, it's May, June, and then late summer for your fall crops. This is August and September, sometimes a little earlier for really long growing crops, but generally August, September if you want to grow into the fall and winter. Cool weather crops don't tolerate heat, so they're a little hard to grow here in the spring, just because last year we had a really awesome spring. I mean, it was nice and cool, and we had several months of spring, and so it was cool season crops were having a good time. Some years in April 4th or whatever, it gets to be 90 and that's the end of it. So you'll have an easier chance growing cool season crops in the fall, but there's no reason not to try in the spring and just hope for the best. So this includes usually anything you're harvesting for the leaves. Is a cool season crop, and then most root vegetables prefer cool weather. Brassicas prefer cool weather, and peas generally prefer cool weather too. Hot weather crops need to be planted after there is no risk of frost whatsoever. I guess the downside to last year's cool spring was that it froze May 10th, which is the latest I have ever seen it freeze in East Tennessee. And so if you had and normally you can plant tomatoes probably, around April 25th if you're feeling really frisky. But if you had done that last year, they would have died in the freeze. So you really have to keep an eye on the weather reports and just make sure that that there is no risk of a frost when you put in your tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, that kind of thing, because a lot of them cannot tolerate cold weather. And then sweet potatoes, even though they're a root vegetable, are actually a very warm season crop. And I wouldn't plant sweet potatoes until late May, early June. They need it to be blazing hot before they go in the ground. So when are you going to harvest it? And this generally, you want to check your seed packet or your seed catalog for the days to harvest, or check the plant cheat sheet. There's kind of a general range on there for most crops that you can kind of get an idea. If you have someone saved seeds and gave you them and you don't know what the exact harvest date is, you can kind of just get an idea of when you might expect to be able to pick it. So you want to know that because certain things are going to be killed in the process of harvesting them. These are like broccoli, cabbage, lettuce, root crops. So that's going to free up space basically in your garden once you harvest them. So knowing that in advance, you can plan to have something ready to go in that spot as soon as you've harvested the previous crop. Some crops have a harvest window that's a little longer. They have like a 2 to 4 week harvest window before they start dying. And this includes like bush beans, peas, cucumbers, summer squash, that kind of thing. So you will probably, if you want them all summer long, you are probably going to need to sow at least one extra round of these plants. So you want to do that 3 to 4 weeks after you plant the original crop. You want to start another one. And so when that new round of plants is maturing and getting ready for harvest, then, and that'll be around the same time that your first crop is getting ready to die. And I know some of these seed catalogs say like your zucchini will produce all summer long, but that just doesn't happen in East Tennessee. We have really tough conditions. It's really hot and humid. It's the humidity probably that does it. But there's just a lot of disease and pest pressure here in East Tennessee. So just if you're really into summer squash, zucchini, cucumbers, whatever, you need to plan on successions every 3 or 4 weeks to keep those crops going. And then some plants, tomatoes, peppers, pole beans, things like kale, chard, winter squash, that kind of stuff can be continuously harvested up until the frost kills them or disease kills them. So you can plan on having these crops in that one spot for the whole season. So this takes this is a little more advanced planning, and it just takes a lot of trial and error. So you may not get it quite right your first year, but keep notes and figure out what you did wrong and try again next year to get the timing a little better on some of these. So how often will you replant something? It's called succession sowing. You're just putting in multiple crops in a season after, every few weeks. So if you want a single harvest plant like lettuce every week, then you need to plan the space to sow it every week. So if you want, a steady supply of like lettuces or radishes, spinach, broccoli, carrots, whatever, then you need to plan on sowing them weekly or every other week, just so that you have a steady supply coming in every week. And again, some crops need to be replaced 1 or 2 times a season. So I think I covered that well enough. All right, so let's say you want lettuce for 20 weeks, okay, out of the year. Do you need to keep space in your garden for 20 weeks worth of lettuce, right? You need space to put these successions somewhere. However, the answer to that is no, you don't need 20 weeks worth of space for lettuce in your garden. Lettuce takes about 5 weeks to grow. So really you just need about 5 weeks worth of space for your lettuce. So however much space you want it. So if you want 2 square feet of lettuce every week, that'd be about 8 plants of lettuce. Then you need 5 weeks of that. So you plant the first week, the second week, the third week, fourth week, fifth week. Then your first week is maturing and you harvest that, and then you can put your week 6 into that spot and so on. So you can just keep going. I know I mentioned crop rotation and you don't want crops in the same spot, but that's kind of year after year. It's okay to do it within the same year to keep a crop in that spot. So again, that's a little more advanced, but I think it's worth trying out. So let's look at some of these questions.
It's mostly just
yes, broccoli. Okay, yeah, broccoli has a lot of worms. And we'll talk about pest and disease control at a future workshop. Okay.
Can you sow succession crops, peas, and other cool weather crops through the summer?
Yeah, so you could probably get a couple successions in the spring if the weather is not too terribly hot, and then you'll need to pause over the summer. Now, certain companies have bred seeds that are more heat tolerant than others, and so you can look in like broccoli. There's actually a lot of breeding going on for heat tolerant broccoli right now. So if you look in a seed catalog, it'll tell you if it's heat tolerant, or it'll say something like it's slow to bolt, which just means it's slow to flower. So if you're going to try to keep a cool season crop going into the summer, you have to be really careful about your variety selection and make sure that you're getting something that's heat tolerant. Otherwise, yeah, you'll have to take a break and then start again like in August or September for the fall. someone says, yeah, the extension office, we're going to try to compile a list of extension office classes that folks can attend for canning.
Yep.
Okay. All right, is that, where is the extension office? Well, we can send out a link to
Yeah, we'll send out a link.
how to find your local extension office. There's one in each county.
Yeah.
Okay, onward. Maybe. Okay. Yeah. Nope, I'm moving around. Okay, so here's the neat trick for extending your harvest window for certain things. So as I mentioned, different varieties have different characteristics. And breeders are trying to pull out, different characteristics all the time from what they're breeding. So things like broccoli, cabbage, corn, potatoes are pretty good examples of this. So where you can plant once, if you pick 2, 3, 4 different varieties of that crop, with different harvest dates. So you need to check the seed catalog and, it'll tell you, so this cabbage or this corn has a 60-day harvest window, 80-day harvest window, 100-day harvest window. And so if you plant all of those at once, you're going to have, a period of 4 to 6 weeks where you are able to harvest a continuous supply of these crops because they're maturing, a week or two after the previous round. And so you could do this, if you wanted like a full summer worth of corn, you could do, so you would just need to plant maybe twice, 3 to 4 weeks after your original planting, you plant the next row with these 3 different varieties, and then you can enjoy, whatever it is. So potatoes have, you can't replant potatoes in the summer. They really only go in the spring, but you can find varieties that are early, mid, or late season potatoes. And so you could plant different varieties of potatoes. So if you want like new potatoes, or if you're selling to the farmer's market or something, and you want to have fresh potatoes every week, then you can use this strategy to have lots of potatoes to dig up each week. Potatoes are a storage crop though, so even though you can't replant them in the summer, you should have, and I'll talk more about storing crops later at a different workshop. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to set up a good spot for storing root crops and stuff like that. Okay, so how much space does it need? Hopefully this is obvious to everyone, but you need to be planning for the final mature size of the plant, not how it looks when it's a seed or a transplant. And I just have to state that, even though it hopefully is very obvious to all of you, because apparently we have had some issues with that in the past, where I was helping someone plant at a community, or helping a group of people at a community garden, and I turned around and someone had dug one hole about a foot deep, and I watched them pour the entire packet of beans into that one hole. So I just have to state it just in case. So you need, and on the plant cheat sheet, I try to tell you general spacing guidelines. On most seed packets tell you general spacing guidelines. Bigger plants need more space in order to be happy. So like squash needs probably at least 3 feet between plants. Tomatoes, I like to put at least 18 inches, and then small things like carrots and radishes. I mean, you can squash a lot into like a square foot. So you can probably fit at least 12 of them in a square foot. My spacing is a little bit bigger than square foot gardening. That's something that I get asked a lot about. I just want to mention that square foot gardening was invented in California, where it does not rain. So they don't it's dry, and they don't have the kind of humidity that we deal with here in East Tennessee. So it rains a lot. It's very humid most of the time. And so plants need air circulation really to help them combat the fungal diseases that will thrive in these hot, humid, wet conditions. So really you want to plan for more spacing than in square foot gardening. You don't necessarily need to plan for the kind of spacing that's listed on some of these seed packets. I don't know why they might say that to give each tomato plant like 3 feet of space. So follow, when in doubt, follow the plant cheat sheet and give your plants plenty of room for air circulation. So these are kind of all the questions that we ask. And this presentation, I will put this in the folder online for everyone to access. So you can go through all of these questions as you're planning, or you can rewatch the video that we'll post onto YouTube if you have any questions about this. So, so the last bit, so once you figure out what you're going to grow and when you're going to plant it and how much you're going to grow and how much space it all needs, then you're going to have to figure out if you can fit everything that you want to grow into your space you have for your garden. So this is where we're going to start actually drawing out maps. You can draw by hand. I am a big fan of Excel spreadsheets and different colored squares, but that's just me. But feel free to make this as fun and colorful as you have the time to do. One map may do you your first year. But as you get more advanced and you're dealing more with succession sowing and really kind of figured out when the seasons are for your garden, you may want to draw a garden map for your spring, summer, and fall, or at least just make notes on your map, like I did on this little example here. There's snap peas in the spring, and then it's going to convert to fall brassicas. There's potatoes in the spring, and then I'm going to put in a round of edamame soybeans in that spot. So there's multiple ways to do this. You want to draw out your garden's dimensions to scale. So if this is a 20 by 25 garden, then each little square represents a square foot in this example. And each square in your garden may be half a foot or 2 feet. It really just depends on how big your garden is, how much paper you have, and how much detail you want to fit in there. And then it's important on these to identify where the sun rises and sets. You want to know east, west, north, south on your garden. And as I mentioned earlier, you want to orient your rows east to west if you're on flat ground, and then orient along contour lines if you're on any kind of slope. Are there more questions, Rosie? I'm not really, I see it flashing, but.
I think someone just asked for the program, do we need space as you all suggest? For example, my potatoes, I planted rows 18 inches apart and plants about 8 inches apart.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do what works. The plant cheat sheet's more of just like general guidelines, trying to maximize what you can get out of a space and also keep airflow good. But that sounds fine for potatoes. Yeah, totally. Okay. Nope. All right. So just some basic terminology so that I'm using the same words to mean the same thing every time. Pathway is a space you walk in. A bed is a space that you plant in and do not walk in. Excuse me. A row is a line of plants. And if you have a wider bed, then you can have multiple rows of crops per bed. And then here's one, a row foot is a 12 by 12 space in your garden, okay? And so if you have a bed that's 3 feet wide and 20 feet long, it's going to contain 60 row feet in it, okay? And that's kind of important for what we're going to talk about in terms of maximizing planting. So if you have a 3 foot wide bed, you're not just going to plant one row of crop down the very center of that bed. You're going to put multiple rows of crops in your 3 foot wide bed and really kind of maximize the growing space in your garden. And the reason we want to do this is because if you have one row of crops and then a walking space and then one row of crops and then a walking space and then one row of crops and then walking space, probably 60 or 7% of your garden is going to be in walking spaces. So this is a way to just kind of maximize your growing space, but also allowing you accessibility into your garden. So you want to have these wider beds just to kind of pack more in and devote more space to growing and less to walking. So draw everything out, but you don't want to get them too wide either, because your arm is only so long, probably about 2 feet ish that you can reach in. So if it's wider than 4 feet, then you're going to have to step into your bed in order to reach the center of your your planting bed. And that's what I want you to avoid doing, is to step on your, you don't want you to step on your planting area. So somewhere between 2 and 4 feet wide. Most commercial organic growers grow on a 30-inch wide bed. And so if you want to scale up to like market gardening, that kind of thing, then you probably want to work with a 30-inch bed, because a lot of the equipment that gets sold to small scale market growers is assuming a 30-inch wide bed. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then again, keep your pathways between 1 and 2 feet wide, just so it's comfortable for you to access the inside of your garden. If you have a really huge garden, you know, 50 by 50 or larger, then you may want to put in a kind of a 3 or 4 foot wide pathway down the center, just so you can get a wheelbarrow into the garden and get, you know, materials into your garden easier that way. So, but have smaller paths kind of branching off of that, so that you can access it. All right, so garden mapping does require, oh,
sorry, a couple
yep.
questions. Kitty wants to know if recycling pallets to create a fence would be a bad idea, like around the garden.
Yeah, sounds fine. Yeah, whatever you have. Dogs can be, especially if they're diggers, can be kind of problematic. So keeping them out is fine. Recycled pallets sounds great. You could even put like little containers on top and grow strawberries or something. Pathways, generally like mulch, wood chips, straw, whatever you have, is fine. Even just cardboard down to keep weeds down would be fine too. So it's whatever you have on hand. Something is better than nothing to help keep weeds down, but it doesn't have to be too complex. Okay. So there's a little math involved in this, and I'm going to share with a spreadsheet with you that may help that a little bit. But you, again, have to plan for the mature size of the plant. So if you have, so you can go either direction with this. You can say, I want to grow 10 tomato plants, and so if each plant needs 1.5 feet of space, then you need 15 feet of row in order to put your tomatoes in. Or you can say, I have 15 feet that I want to devote to tomatoes. How many tomatoes can I put in there? So either direction is fine in terms of planning. You just have to go one way or the other. You know, zucchini needs a lot more space, so you know, you may be able to fit 3 plants in a 10-foot, 2-foot wide row. Carrots, you know, you can, if you're fitting 12 carrots per square foot and you have 10 square feet, then that's 120 carrots that you can put in. So there's a little bit of math involved. Hopefully, not too strenuous. I know some people groan anytime I mention it. Okay. So another thing to keep in mind is that we are going to provide trellising materials for you. And so we will give you, I think, 10 T-posts. New gardeners will get 10 T-posts. And so I strongly, strongly encourage folks to trellis your tomatoes, your cucumbers, peas, and pole beans up this trellis. And we'll talk a lot more about that, I think at the next workshop, actually, about how to do different trellising for these different types of crops. So trellising, again, helps with airflow. There's a lot more airflow around a crop that's growing upwards than one that's sprawling on the ground. And it also saves a lot of room. So a tomato is a really big plant if you just let it sprawl all over your garden. So if it's just on the ground, it's going to need a lot more space. But if you put up a trellis, suddenly it's taking up very minimal space in your garden. And if you are planting in these wider beds, then you know you can put crops around the trellis tomatoes and grow in that space too. For tomatoes and cucumbers, usually them with herbs or edible flowers. And then for pole beans, because they're legumes and they're going to fix nitrogen into the soil, that would be nice to pair with, say, lettuce or kale or some other brassica that's going to be happy with the extra nitrogen from your pole beans. Generally, you don't want to pair nitrogen fixers like peas and beans with root crops, because root crops don't like a lot of nitrogen. If you provide root crops with a lot of nitrogen, you'll get, really lush leaves and very tiny roots. So just kind of keep that in mind. People ask me a lot about companion planting. And I will say that mixing crops together in your wide rows is very beneficial. And it can help keep pests away by confusing them. Because if you just have a straight row of one thing, you're essentially just creating a buffet table for whatever pest likes to eat that plant. So if you can break it up a little or put a lot of herbs around it, something that smells very strongly, because insects are following chemical trails on the wind. And so if you surround, your cabbage with a lot of basil or whatever, the basil's going to put off a strong off-putting smell. Maybe fewer cabbage worms are going to find your brassicas at that point. It's not perfect. Obviously, some bugs are going to find your plants. But it helps. And then also if you put in flowering herbs like dill and cilantro and a lot of other kinds of edible flowers or even just ornamental flowers, that will attract a lot of beneficial insects to your garden. And those will help with pollinate your plants. And they will also, a lot of them are predators like ladybugs and lacewings. The adults don't actually eat pests. They are attracted to the flowers in your garden, but they will lay their eggs, and it's actually the ladybug larva that eats a lot of pests like aphids and that kind of thing. So by planting a lot of flowers, you're attracting these predatory insects into your garden, and they can help control some of the bad bugs for you. There's a lot of like guides for companion planting on the internet. I can't find any information to like back up what they're saying on these guides, and some of them conflict with each other. They'll tell you, you must plant tomatoes with carrots, and another guide will say never plant tomatoes with carrots or whatever. So I wouldn't worry too much about the specifics of companion planting. Okay, diversity is good, and the more things that you can put together, the better your garden. The more benefits it'll have for your garden. The less single rows of crops you have, the better for you. So, but don't be too worried about these companion planting guides that you find online. Because I honestly have looked into it and can't really find any science to back it up. It's just kind of hearsay. Are there any tips for keeping your cats away? I don't know. Cats are some cats, when they really get it in their head that they're going to use your garden as a litter box, they're hard to deter. And so if they're becoming a real big pest, there are these automatic watering systems for like deer and other critters that are motion censored. And so when they detect something walking in the garden, they will spray it with water. So if you have a really bad pest problem, something like that may be worth investing in. Otherwise, fencing and, just trying to make the places inhospitable to them as possible. Yeah, mothballs, yeah. They can, I don't know that would count as organic though. So not everyone may want to do that. But in terms of herbs that are best around here in general, gosh, everything grows pretty well around here. With some herbs are perennials, which means they grow for multiple years, and some herbs are annuals, which means they will die at frost. So you have to keep that in mind. So if you're going to plant things like rosemary or thyme or oregano or lavender, then you want to put those in a spot where they can stay permanently, because once they're in that spot, they're going to stay there for several years. So keeping that in mind. Whereas like basil and cilantro and dill, that kind of stuff is just an annual. Parsley is technically a biannual, so it grows for 2 years, but you can treat it as an annual. So that's really, but you can grow almost any herb. You just have to keep in mind whether it's an annual or perennial, and make sure that if it is a perennial, it goes into a spot where it can stay. How did you like your irrigation system that I put in last year? I liked it a lot. I will talk a little bit more. I'll talk more about irrigation next time around at our next workshop. And I installed a drip irrigation system last year. It wasn't too bad. It's probably, I don't know, maybe $150, but it's going to last a few years. So I think it's a worthwhile investment. But I'll talk all about how to get water in your garden next time. Okay, just for the sake, we're going to keep moving. All right. If you can't fit everything you want in your garden, you have a couple options, which is to add more space to your garden or pare down what you want to grow. Or if you find that you have extra room, you can either increase what you're planting or reduce your garden size. Or if you are like me, just save a little room for the random impulse buys that you know you're going to pick up as soon as you walk into any garden center in town. So I know you're going to do it. So keep that in mind and make sure you have room for everything you're going to buy. Again, keep notes as best you can. Have a little garden notebook or something, or whatever. So keep note of what you did and don't do. So you're going to come up with this nice, awesome map and garden plan, and then you're actually going to get out there and you're going to have, I don't know, something, you're probably not going to follow it exactly. So you just want to make note what you did and didn't do. And then make notes about what died when, what the weather was like, you know, different pests and diseases that you observed. You'll appreciate all of these notes next year when you go to plan your garden out. So now I'm going to switch screens and we're going to go and actually look at my garden plan. Just to give you an idea of what this looks like. So I have a about 25 by 25 space. Plus I'm planning on putting in a couple of 4x8 raised beds a little closer to the house. So the garden's kind of down the hill from my house, and I'm going to put these raised beds right next to the porch. But you can see, so I've got my trellis plants kind of back here, and you can see that I've got a row where I'm just going to put herbs and some different onions and stuff down in front of the tomatoes. And so this actually, the tomatoes are on the western side, so they are going to get the full brunt of the afternoon sun, and they're actually going to provide a little bit of shade for the plants that are in this area in the afternoon. So, and these are all but again, I get kind of limited morning sun. So these are all kind of shade tolerant. They'll be happier with a little bit of shade. So I put them there kind of strategically. I've got a plot for my peppers. My rows are a little over 2 feet wide, and my walking paths are about 18 inches wide. It's hard to do that on scale exactly, but you kind of get the idea. So they're not, my walking paths are not the same size as my beds, but that's just how they come up on this. So broccoli, kale, collards, onions. I've got my squash and my melons here. I'm growing a lot of melons this year. I love melons. So I've got some in my raised bed too. The garlic is actually overwintering. So this was planted, I think, in October, and this is going to be harvested in July. So that's currently in the garden already. I'm going to put some spring peas in really soon. And you can see edamame, popcorn, sweet potatoes, okra, and then the stuff in my raised beds is going to be succession sowing mostly. So I'll be able to better control the space available for these crops in a raised bed. And then what I've done is created another little spreadsheet where I have everything I'm going to grow, the type, the variety name that I'm growing, and then the amount of plants that I want, and the amount of row feet that each plant requires. And then thanks to the magic of spreadsheets, I've multiplied these two columns together. So you get how much space, you know, you need to devote to each plant in this column. And then I've got off the seed packets or off the seed catalogs, all the days to harvest. You're like, what's up with this broccoli with 220 days? This is an overwintering broccoli. So you plant it in the fall and you harvest it in the spring. So it really does take 220 days to harvest this broccoli. We'll be giving some of this out. I happen to really enjoy purple sprouting broccoli because it pops up usually February, March is when you start getting the broccoli ready to harvest, and it's just a delight to have fresh broccoli that early in the season. So anyway, this is when I am planning this. So this is all the stuff I'm planning to start indoors. And Rosie and I actually just recorded a few videos on seed starting that Rosie's got to do some editing, I guess, and we'll pop those up on our YouTube channel, and I will share those out so you can kind of get an idea if you've never done indoor seed starting before. It's a fun thing to try, and so you can kind of get a feel for that. And then the estimated date that these seeds will be ready for transplanting. And then I've made a column for when I'm actually going to put them in the ground so I can have that information. And then this column is for stuff that's going to go outside without getting started indoors. And then this column, the estimated harvest date, is just either this column or this column with this number added onto it. So Excel will add numbers, or you can say, you know, I want to add 105 days onto this date, and that would be, August 30th. So I will share this spreadsheet with everyone, so you can just, you'll have a copy of it, and you can download it and kind of fiddle around with this and make it your own. And then for succession, I've just kind of made a note over here how many successions I want to sow, and then what date I would like to get those in the ground. So all right.
There's a question about cross-pollination with your squash.
Seed saving for my squash. So it will not affect the current generation. So your squash plants are going to produce the squash that is on the seed packet. Now, if you have a bunch of squash in your garden and you save seeds from those plants, that squash, that next generation will be all kinds of different things, because it will have hybridized, and it can be anything really. Squash hybridizes really easily, because it's pollinated by bees, and those bees will visit a bunch of different flowers. So, but no, within one generation, you don't need to worry about that. Now, corn is sensitive to cross pollination in the generation that you will be eating. So if you have field corn and sweet corn growing in the same space, and they are tasseling at the exact same time, then you may have really nasty tasting sweet corn as a result. So you want to be careful about tasseling. Now you can plant them together as long as they tassel at different times. So that's something you're going to need to research when those tassel dates are, and make sure that you've got at least 2 weeks in between varieties so that they're not spreading pollen to each other. But otherwise, corn's the only thing you need to worry about, that it affecting the quality of the stuff, the plant, of the fruit you're going to be eating. Otherwise, no. And the whole thing about hot peppers making your sweet peppers hot is not true either. That the fruit is basically the womb, and the seed is the plant baby. Okay, so your womb isn't affected by what's fertilizing it, basically, right? So it's just the next generation that's affected by that. But I've heard people say, "Oh, my plant's crossed and I got a weird fruit," that year. That it just doesn't happen. That doesn't mean that your seed wasn't contaminated and something weird came up in your seed, okay? But it's not going to. If you have true seed, it's not going to cross that the same year. I'm sorry that was a long explanation, but folks have mentioned this to me before, and I just wanted to clear that up. Can you email us? Yes, this is in, I just dropped it into the file that Rosie just shared before the workshop in that link. So does oiling the silk really keep the worms out? I have heard that, yeah, but I have never actually tried it. I don't tend to grow sweet corn because for me, it takes up a lot of space, because you need a lot of corn in order to get good pollination. And sweet corn is so cheap at the farmer's market, usually I don't bother growing it because you can get it for like 25 cents a year. So to me, that's not worth it. However, if it's worth it to you, you can try getting a spray bottle full of like canola oil or something and just spraying the silks right when they emerge and periodically after that. And that's supposed to keep the worms out of the ears. For field corn and for popcorn, usually the husks are so much tighter that you don't get a lot of worm damage with those with field and popcorn. So it's less of a concern. I grow popcorn almost every year because, hey, it's awesome to grow your own snack, and totally recommend it. We're giving out popcorn seed, so give it a try. But and I generally see very, very little worm damage on the corn with the popcorn. So yes, I've heard it works. I've not tried it. Is my short answer to my long answer. All right. Let's see if I go back to this, hopefully. Yep. Okay. I think, okay, so next steps for next time, and hopefully we're not too, oh my God, it's almost 8 o'clock. I'm so sorry, guys. I know everyone has a lot of questions, but next steps are you need to create your garden plan and draw out a map, and we will ask that you send the map to Rosie with your seed order, which we will send out more information via email about how to order plants. But basically, we're trying to get you ready to order your plants and seeds. So start working on your garden maps. Again, you can use a plain sheet of paper. You can get a grid piece of paper. You can draw it on your computer. You can download one of those garden planning programs with, you know, I think most of them cost money, but whatever you feel like doing. And then we will start handing out spring seeds in April. We'll hand out summer plants and seeds in early May, I think. I'm not 100% sure of my own timeline here, but that's usually when we do it. And then we will try to get these binders assembled and distributed to you later this month. And then if you need any help or have questions about garden planning, we'll upload these videos, this video. I have a handout from last year that I can put into the garden folder. Excuse me. And yeah, it's going to probably take you a little while your first time around, but it gets easier. And I'm sure some of our second year people will attest to how much easier it is your second year to do the garden mapping. I don't think I got the email link with the binder. We'll try to, we'll send it.
I got it. Yeah, I got that.
Is there a due date for the garden plans? We'll let you know. Figure it out. Sorry.
Not going on.
We're a little seat of our pants. And then with vegetables like spinach and kale that you've already started indoors, we're not going to hand out seeds before our handout dates, if that makes sense, just because that's too complicated with 50 people in the program. But if you have your own seeds, yes, you can start them indoors and put them out. If you wait until we hand them out, it's probably easier just to put them outside because it'll be warm enough for them to just go straight out. Yes.